of you guys have wondered about my backstory, and until now, I felt like the purpose of the channel was to become the go-to place to learn about the Mediterranean diet. Not a place to learn about me, but there are moments in your life that define direction. And while this little snapshot doesn't explain the adventures of how I ended up in Spain or how I ended up starting a YouTube channel at the age of 64, those are stories for another day. I want to share the most important adventure story that got me into those things. So back in time we go. It's July 3rd, 1997, and I'm jumping from a small runabout boat onto the back deck of a much larger boat in some really rough waters in the Pacific Ocean, just outside San Francisco Bay. It's pretty scary. The ocean is churning, both boats are lurching around in really rough waters, and I've got one shot to make it or I end up in the drink. And I am not a good swimmer. The ridiculous reason I'm attempting this unnatural feat is to legally avoid a really big tax bill, a loophole long since closed that allowed me to buy a boat without having to pay California sales tax if I took ownership in international waters and kept it and me outside the US for 90 days. I was changing jobs, moving to LA, and had this goofy idea I should live on a boat. I'd never owned a boat. I didn't know anything about it except that my father, who loved sailing, once told me when he reached 80, he was going to trade his sailboat in for a powerboat. Unfortunately, he died at 80, so it seemed like a good idea for me to buy what he'd already done all the homework on. I knew he'd be happy. The plan was to sail to Ensenada, Mexico. It'd take 3 days, and I enlisted the help of a friend who actually knew something about piloting boats and his friend who'd come along for the ride. It seemed pretty straightforward. We headed out with a good route, full gas tanks, full water tanks, plenty of provisions. For some silly reason I still don't quite know, I'd packed the fridge full of fabulous French cheeses and all kinds of gourmet goodies. What was I thinking? I love Mexican food, and I was heading right for it. We each took 6-hour shifts, mostly making sure the autopilot continued to keep the boat heading in the right direction. At about 4 a.m., July 4th, with me at the helm, I smelled something funny. I thought I smelled smoke, and even I know a fire on a boat can lead to disaster pretty fast. I woke up my friend. He jumped out of bed in a flash, grabbed the fire extinguisher, threw himself into the engine room below. Did I mention these guys who are race car drivers and Ferrari mechanics? Knowing how not to panic and jump to action were two remarkable qualities of both guys I will be forever grateful for, because without a doubt, they saved my life. The main wiring was melted. No more GPS, no more satellite, no more autopilot, and the cheese-filled refrigerator was dead. But gratefully, we were still afloat and alive. The closest port for help was Catalina Island, but we were going to have to cross back into U.S. waters. We decided to chance it, but covered the back of the boat with a canvas so the name wouldn't show, somehow hoping that that would disguise our illegal entry. I was so scared. While the guys stayed below using every bit of their mechanic skills to put things back together with minimal supplies and almost no tools, I had to keep watch above. Unfortunately, July 4th is the single busiest weekend of the entire year in Catalina, so it meant the Coast Guard were keeping a close eye on things, and eventually we were found out. They towed us to the only remaining open mooring in the entire harbor and said we could stay until the owner came to claim his spot. And that'd give us a chance to go into town, collect the other supplies we needed to fix things, and get things going again. Miraculously, they never asked us anything else. A very short hour later, though, the owner of the slip showed up. The repairs weren't nearly done, but we managed to fire up one engine and head it out, limping down to Mexico under half power and no electronics to guide us. The rest of the journey was pretty unremarkable if you don't count the dolphins that led the way, until we got to Ensenada the next day. We pulled into the slip, discovered we didn't have any way to hook up to electricity, so I needed to run the generator while the guys hitched a ride to town to try to find some plugs that would work. So I stayed on the boat. I was exhausted. I was feeling pretty anxious, and if I'm honest, I was on the verge of tears, wondering what in the world I'd gotten myself into, but thinking at least this was the end of the adventure. But I was wrong. Nobody likes people who run their generators at the dock. They're noisy, they're stinky, and in my case, because it was damaged in the fire, it was billowing, a little smoke. So it shouldn't have been a surprise when the guy who had the slip next to mine came over and politely, but pretty firmly, asked me if I was going to run my generator all night long. But that was when the adventure began, because that guy, the guy that asked me about my generator, that was George, and we just celebrated 27 years of being together July 5th. So there you have it. If you're a subscriber, you've heard me mention George in some of the videos. You may even have caught a smidge of a glimpse of him from time to time, shy guy that he is. But I thought it was high time he got a proper introduction, since he's been a silent partner of this YouTube adventure since the beginning. And now that you know us both, someday I'll sit down to share how we ended up in Spain and how the channel came to life too. But since you asked, this was the adventure that launched all the others.